Welcome to Discussions and Dragons, the show where we discuss Dungeons and Dragons. I am your host, Resident Player Character, and I am joined today by our resident Dungeon Master. Today's episode will cover everything that has to do with initiative. But first, how are you doing today, resident Dungeon Master?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Done that intro like 7 times and I still mess it up, so... Yeah, it happens. Talking about initiative today.
Yes.
Tell me about initiative. What is it? How do you spell it?
Alright. INX, you got me.
Yeah.
No, initiative is one of the more exciting parts of Dungeons and Dragons. It's what can get some players into it because they want the excitement, they want the rush, like the adrenaline rush, they want the combat, I'm actually going to get to roll some dice.
Mm-hmm.
And initiative is just a fancy way of saying the order in which players and monsters...
Whose turn it is?
Yeah, whose turn it is. So, essentially, initiative, it's not just something that happens all the time, or something a player can engage. It's something that the Dungeon Master says, hey, about now is the time in a social situation, or wherever you are in the game, for initiative to be rolled.
Because you can decide that at any time.
But it's usually appropriate.
Yeah.
For the situation, right? It's not going to be out of the blue.
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
We'll get to that.
So.
Those are the best ones. This is one of the one of the staple random parts of the game that requires dice to do properly. So I think that's what sets it apart from other things we've talked about, because everything else we've talked about in previous episodes has been, like, controlled and, like, just mathed out. But this is really, like, where it comes down to how well you built your character and how well you can defend yourself and either defend yourself or avoid initiative altogether.
Oh, yeah.
So
there are a few key points to note about combat and initiative for D&D. One is, what we've already discussed. It's only going to happen if there's a situation that it's either required to complete an objective, or it's just something that you got yourself into trouble, and it's maybe you got caught trying to pick a lock, or maybe you were just approached by some hostile creatures in the night, something like that. It's just something that could happen, and you can try to avoid it the best you can.
You can certainly try.
But it's one of my favorite parts. A little bit less than the role-playing and building the character and everything, but just, combat and initiative are just really exciting. And
whenever I see you about to roll initiative, it's almost the most excited I've ever seen you, because you get to put us in a situation that we don't control fully, and you revel in that. It's
also just like you get to see new creatures and see all of their abilities and see how people can work together to, like, solve the situation or get out of there. And there's also a lot of role-playing that comes with initiative and combat as well, which I think is a great way to, like, show how your character would react in a hostile situation. And so, essentially, when you're going to be going into combat and your Dungeon Master is getting all their stuff together, there's a little bit of a moment where the DM will say, roll for initiative. Now, yes, it's the name of the episode, and it's one of the key staples of Dungeons & Dragons, roll for initiative. Just like the iconic D20 symbol, when you roll for initiative, you are using the 20-sided die. And this is important because there's just, a wide range, or a wider range of results you can get on a 20-sided die for how your character reacted to, this is a fight or flight situation. And they could have a slower response time or a higher response time, depending on quite a few things.
What things?
First and foremost, you have your D20 roll. You could roll high or low, but let's just say that your average is going to be about 10 or 11 on the die.
And for anyone who is listening to this episode for the first time and not any of our others, the 20-sided die is the D20, and you can roll 1 through 20.
Yes.
Just for any people who are completely new to this. So 10 would be about the average.
Yeah, 10 or 11. Statistically, it's 10 and a half, but we round up to 11. So, you are going to roll that 20-sided die, and you're going to add your dexterity modifier. Now, we've talked about in previous episodes where your dexterity comes from, and your dexterity modifier is simply your dexterity score minus 10 divided by 2. There's a little bit of math that comes in here, but it should have already be pre-calculated and be on your character sheet.
Yes.
So you can just, real quick, have that number in your head. You're going to add that together. And then you're also going to add any other modifiers from like magic items or abilities that your character might have from whatever class or race that you decided to choose.
Mm-hmm.
So there could be a situation where maybe you're wearing some really heavy armor, or you have like a cursed item and you have to take disadvantage on your initiative roll. Well, you're going to roll 2d20s and you're going to take the lowest number that you rolled on either die. So let's say you rolled a 4 and a 14. Well, you're going to take that 4.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just to say, alright, you have a higher chance of rolling something lower because your character has something hindering them. But it could also be vice versa. You could get an advantage on your initiative roll and roll 2d20 and take the higher of the two. That 4 and the 14, you're getting a 14. It's a lot better.
Once you hear your DM say that you have disadvantage, it's kind of just horrible because you see what you could have gotten. And sometimes it's a 6 and you roll the 5 on the second one, but sometimes it's a 19 and you roll the 5 on the second one.
It's just, especially if you've forgotten you have a disadvantage and you get reminded, just a bad feeling.
You almost got away with it.
So
I've almost gotten away with it a couple times.
So yes, always make sure you're looking out for anything that would alter the outcome of your roll, whether it's your initiative modifier overall, whether it's advantage, disadvantage, what have you. Always double check with your DM just to be sure. It's not going to get annoying. It's just going to keep everything how it's supposed to.
If anything, we're going to thank you for reminding them because it's hard for some DMs to keep track of like 6-7 players.
And not just 6-7 players, because that's 6 things in combat that are each rolling their own initiative, but all of the creatures and monsters that they put against. So that's probably going to be like 8 to 12 things that they're trying to keep track of all at once.
I got a question. What is the most initiative you've ever had in one encounter? Like most things that you had to roll for, or that had to roll?
Well, spoiler, it's probably going to be next session in our campaign. Unfortunately, we weren't able to play this week just because of scheduling, but it's going to be in the dozens.
Okay.
Probably close to 50, 60 things.
Now, me as a player, what I think that means, just explaining to people, when he says we're getting like 50 things for initiative, that means, to me, 50 like rats or very small enemies.
Oh yeah, you're not gonna be thrown against something you can't handle most of the time. In initiative, your dungeon master is going to be like, they're not going to try to kill you with initiative or combat.
They should do that, but I was gonna say it depends on your dungeon master.
They're not going to intentionally just say randomly, oh, by the way, there's 40 warriors surrounding you. You can't go anywhere. You're about to lose your characters.
If they say that, there's probably something bigger they have planned and you're not meant to fight them. Just saying for anyone who wants to maybe metagame a little bit during their sessions and pretend like they don't know that. If you're a new player and you have a DM and they say something like that, be prepared for something either bigger or a misdirect to come, because you're not going to fight that many things.
So, yeah, speaking of that, there are different objectives that you can have during initiative. So, just skipping a little, or sidestepping from the math part of it, when you are entering initiative, you have to be thinking, alright, the Dungeon Master just put us in initiative. We were in initiative because maybe we made somebody mad and they want to, take our money, or maybe we stepped into a trap and we have to fight something to get out. There are endless situations in which initiative can be rolled, but you have to think of what is the objective in this situation, because it's not always I have to beat the other guy. It's I have to complete this goal. Maybe you're in initiative trying to run from, like, Indiana Jones style, from a giant ball rolling down the hallway. Maybe
that ball would have initiative, would it not?
The ball itself would have like a speed, and on your turn you would have to use your turn, and we'll get a little bit more into this in a second. You'll have to use your turn to try to get away from that trap, and it's really quite interesting because some players are going to be better at this, some players are going to be worse, depending on how you use your turn.
Some players are going to be flattened.
And what's even more interesting with combat is you throw multiple, not encounters, it's multiple things, not like monsters, but
items.
Not items, in fact, just multiple hindrances that...
Impediments?
Yeah, maybe it's a trap along with a monster, along with, hey, you need to save your ally, and you only have a certain amount of time to do so.
Certain amount of turns.
Certain amount of turns, yeah. So going back to the math part, when initiative is rolled, there's a very systematic way that Dungeons and Dragons has set this up. So what's going to happen is when you're rolling for initiative, whoever has the highest roll, whether it's the Dungeon Master or like the monsters or whatever, or the players, Dungeon Master will keep a tally of who's in first and who's in 2nd, third, all the way down to the last person. Each thing on that list will have their own individual turn in a round. Once you've gone through everybody once, you go right back up to the top, and you just keep on going back down the list.
And these turns are, I think we talked about this in one of our really early episodes, but turns are based off of time.
So yeah, a single turn or a single round lasts for 6 seconds. So what you can think of is, even though everybody's taking their own turn on their own time, everything's happening in the same 6 seconds. Just trying to like imagine it, even though you can kind of metagame and stack on abilities and there's tons of different things, but just a round is 6 seconds, and a round is everybody going at once. It's just combat can be dragged out if people are taking a while to decide what they want to do, or there's just so many enemies and so many things you need to keep track of. You could have a single combat last for multiple sessions.
We've been there.
Or it can last for 15-20 minutes. It just depends on if you achieve your goal or not. And so if you are rolling for initiative, it's said to be for a player character, the higher your dexterity, the better off you are, because dexterity determines your initiative modifier and your armor class in most cases. So a high dexterity is a very, very powerful thing, even better than Constitution, which is your hit points.
Oh yeah.
So
you don't need high hit points if you can just avoid initiative or end it quickly.
And you could min-max and just put all your points into dexterity even if you don't need it, but dexterity is, statistically speaking, the best stat in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. That's just how the game was built.
And it really makes sense, like, role-playing wise when you think about it, because what classes have the highest dexterity?
I think of like rogues, you've got rangers.
So would you imagine striking
monks.
first?
Probably a rogue.
Yeah. Or a monk or a ranger.
Yeah. And just people from far away. Fighters, too.
What classes have the lowest initiative? Or no, lowest dexterity?
I would say, like, lowest dexterity are going to be your tankier classes, like a paladin. They don't really need dexterity because they can just wear armor for their defense.
And they're probably not ones to strike first.
Clerics as well, yeah.
They're more the defenders.
Yep. There's also wizards. They can use spells to raise their AC, so they don't need a high dexterity. Because they're mainly on the offense. They're not going to need that defense.
If you find abilities or feats, which I think we briefly talked about.
We did talk about feats.
We can have an entire episode on feats, and we probably will. But if you take a feat, and a feat, just like it's saying it in short, it's like a special ability you can choose at a certain level, or certain ranks of levels, where it gives you some kind of, like, how would you say, like a power, or like a buff.
When you're leveling up, as you level up, you gain certain class abilities, but then there are some, like, buffers. When you level up, you'll get more hit points, you'll get more class abilities, or you'll get an ability score improvement. You can choose to either raise your primary stats to +1 or +2, or you can decide to get a feat. And a feat is just another special ability that can either raise your stats just a tiny bit and give you an extra power, or just give you an extra power.
What I was saying is feats can sometimes raise your initiative.
Yes.
Or they can make it easier for you to go first in initiative or go later, right?
More specifically, there's the alert feat, which adds a bonus of 5 to your initiative. Now that's pretty substantial, because to get a +5 on initiative, just basically with your dexterity, you'd have to have a dexterity score of 20, which is very hard to achieve, because you need a perfect 18 plus some good race combinations. So
you'd be min-maxing at that point to get to that value. So if you could just have that,
min-maxing or getting really lucky on some roll. Like,
yeah. I'm
thinking an elvish rogue. That would be someone who would need a 20 in dexterity.
Oh yeah.
So I digress. When you are in your combat and you've got your rounds and you've got your everything happening at once, yes, it can get bogged down, and it can really be made simple by like a couple of tips and tricks, however your dungeon master wants you to do it. But really, the whole goal of the point of combat is to achieve a goal. And once you've achieved that goal, you can get right out of combat, get back into your role playing, kind of slow the game down a little bit more, or speed the game up to actually exploring and questing and what have you. So when you are rolling initiative and you've got all your ducks in a row, and it comes to your turn, what are you going to do in your turn? I'll tell you. So there are 4 main parts of every single player, monster, what have you's turn. There is an action, there's a bonus action, there's the movement, and then something called a free action, and then there are things called legendary actions, but legendary actions really only apply for like magic items or very, very powerful bosses.
If you have a boss with a legendary action, you know you're in it.
Oh yeah,
you're gonna have a hard time.
It's either going to be a very, very interesting boss fight, or the last boss fight.
Yeah. So, and also, where do layer actions go in with that?
Layer actions are given their own initiative count, and if the conditions are met, so layer actions are a specific thing where if you have, or like conditions are met for like a boss and they're in their own layer, they can have an effect like that can slow players down, slowing their movement, maybe they take extra damage, maybe they have disadvantage on attack. It can be anything. It's just something that happens mostly on initiative count 20. So it's basically like if that layer action were to have rolled and gotten a 20 on initiative, that's when that layer ability or a layer action would take place. You've probably seen that in like monster manuals, or just looking at like a lot of the legendary creatures and high CR creatures.
And CR is challenge rating.
Yes, challenge rating.
I don't believe we talked about that too much, but
yeah.
That's just essentially how hard it is to fight the thing you're fighting.
Yes, it's just a little number that tells you how hard it should be to fight somebody. And
he very often, when he's telling me about encounters that we could have had, says, "Man, this was like a CR3. You guys would be able to handle that." So I've learned what those numbers mean over time. They seem low. If your DM tells you CR3, be a little bit worried.
The way you can easily tell an encounter, and it's just a quick maths thing, is take the CR and take the level of your characters. Let's say if it's a CR5, you need 4 level 5 characters to be on the level. Like, have that be an even fight for 4 level 5 characters, maybe even with a character death. So if it's a CR6 and you have 4 level 5s, don't do that encounter.
Nope.
So
avoid that initiative.
But the players won't know the exact number of the challenge rating for combat. The DM will. It's really up to the players to determine, is this challenge, or is the rating of this challenge too high for us? So maybe they get into a scrape with like a serpent or a dragon, and they're really low level, and they're like, we shouldn't get here, we're taking a lot of damage. You can end the combat if you can get away from the dragon. Bam. And you get out of initiative. Yeah, you can disengage.
I'm going to keep hammering this home. It is very possible to avoid almost every initiative or get out of it without, like, fighting anything. That's a very useful tool. You don't need to fight everything. It's not Skyrim.
Your character, I mean, it's also part of your character. And
oh, yeah. Some characters are going to want to fight everything.
What are the characters that are always on edge or always trying to avoid a confrontation? Those are the characters who are going to be pretty useful in your party sometimes, because they could have an out that nobody else thinks of.
Don't be surprised if your rogue doesn't come out of stealth the entire fight.
Don't be surprised if your bard tries to pull something out of their hat, or just tries to do some kind of trickery, or maybe even the wizard, instead of using powerful spells, tries to like put some enemies to sleep so you can sneak off. Like there's tons of tools you can use with spells and everything, and we'll get to like spells in combat in just a second. Like spells during combat, that there's more to just damage when you're fighting something. There are tons of utility spells that come with all classes.
I'd say that like 50% of fights usually include damage. Like if anybody's ever played Pokemon, you need to damage the Pokemon before you can catch it. You have to weaken it first. Usually those spells don't work on perfectly healthy creatures or enemies too much, as well as they would if they were injured, but I'd say maybe like half or like 45% of fights involve actual fighting, but maybe like another 40% involves incapacitation.
Or just trying to get like an advantage, like the high ground. Or maybe you're trying to get across a river before a bridge collapses. Maybe you're trying to run down a hallway and avoid a
There are
boulder.
literal endless initiatives.
Endless encounters, endless possibilities. Love this game. So, yeah, back to spells and combat.
Yes.
So, like I was saying, each round in combat lasts for 6 seconds, and you have your action, bonus action, movement, and free action. And we'll break down the action, bonus action, movement, and free action real quick. All of this happens in 6 seconds, so you can
Each
kind of
turn.
like each turn. Yes. So when it's when it's on my turn, and if you tuned in last episode, we made our own characters, and we can just use it as kind of an example. I'm a paladin. Let's say it's my turn on my movement, or it's on my turn. I can use my movement to approach an enemy, and let's say I don't use all of my movement. It's usually like 30, 40 something feet for a player character. Could be more, could be less. Just really depends. So make sure you're keeping track of all of this. So I approach the enemy, and then I can use my action to take an attack. Maybe I use my action to use Channel Divinity and try to sense undead or something. I could approach an enemy and just get in a defensive stance and give them disadvantage on their attack. Maybe I'm trying to goad them into attacking me. Maybe I use my action to make a charisma check or ask my DM, hey, can I persuade these enemies to attack me? And can I like intimidate them or something like that? You don't have to use your action to cast spells or try to make an attack. You could
Use your action to run away.
you could use your action to run away. You could use your action to do something creative that could save the rest of your party.
You could start singing a folk song, and distract the enemies while your rogue stabs them.
It's tons of possibilities. So
Yep.
your action is your biggest tool on your turn. It's going to be the biggest hitter. It's going to be the most important. Most of anything in D&D takes one action. The bonus action is simply just an extra ability. Think of something you can kind of do on the side.
Yeah.
And it's not as powerful as an action, but it can still be very useful. It could be like a utility spell like Misty Step. I love that. It's just you blink 30 feet in a direction that you can see, and it can add on to your movement. It can get you out of a sticky situation, literally and metaphorically. And it's just, bonus actions are very useful. You're not going to have a lot of bonus actions at lower level, but bonus actions are mostly going to be spells or specific abilities.
And they will be labeled on like cards and in books if
Yes.
they're a bonus action or not, so you don't have to guess or like ask.
Now, there's also the discrepancy of, okay, maybe you've done your action and all your movement and you want to make an ability check or you want to intimidate somebody. I'm sorry, boss. Your turn's done. You can't use a bonus action to make an ability check.
Sometimes your DM's going to be nice, sometimes they're not going to be. Most of the time they're not going to be.
If it really makes sense for the situation, I personally will say yes to things.
Yeah.
If it doesn't make sense at all, maybe I'll take away your bonus action. Maybe I'll take away your action. Maybe I'll say you have no movement. There are certain conditions in D&D such as grappled, paralyzed, unconscious that
Frozen.
frozen. Just literal just conditions that take away from some of your prowess in combat. Maybe reducing your movement speed to 0. Maybe giving you disadvantage on your attacks. Maybe making it so you can't see or hear anything. There are tons of things.
One of my like biggest fears in this game, and one of the scariest things I think in general, is things can happen on your turn.
Yes,
Like things that you don't expect that the DM is hiding.
I did forget a part of a turn. It doesn't happen on your turn. It happens on someone else's turn, but it is a part of your turn. This is it's a little confusing here. It's called a reaction.
Yes.
So I said there's a lot of things that are actions, few things that are bonus actions. Reactions are like the
Very few things are reactions.
they're like when you combine a bucket of oil and like a little bit of water. It's that tiny little bit of water at the top. It's just the 1% of spells or abilities that say, hey, this is a reaction.
Yep.
Reactions just mean that this kind of thing will only occur once something else meets its conditions. So, big example, the shield spell. It's a first level spell. Lots of wizards use it because they're very squishy. Shield just adds +5 to your AC. You can only use shield as a reaction when you are being attacked by someone, whether it's a spell or just a regular somebody swinging at you with a bat.
Bat.
Yeah, and I was thinking like a club or like a sword or something.
I'm going to tell a really quick story before you go on. My most recent experience with a wizard using shield was a very interesting one. As a reaction. You were there. So, we had a wizard. we were exploring this tower in the woods on our way to an objective, and there were it wasn't a clock tower, it was just a tower.
It was a crumbling vestige, and it had a wagon out front, and it looked like it was built on a man-made pathway in the middle of a lake.
Yeah. That wagon we can get to later, but something with that happened. But we went into this tower, and it was just like dilapidated building. It had this door with a special thing we needed to do. I ended up opening it by doing a stupid dance, because it was like mimicking things that were on the front, like stick figures.
Fun fact, if they failed the puzzle to open the door, they would have started an initiative, because they would have summoned a dragon.
Really?
Which they would not have been able to handle because the CR is too high.
This is the first I'm hearing of this.
That is a situation where you didn't really expect the combat or initiative to be rolled, but if they met the conditions, I say, all right, roll for initiative.
So that could have ended the campaign.
Could have. Maybe you get away from
The
the
face
dragon.
he just gave me was really funny. So we went into this building after I opened the door, and there were 4 clay golems, right?
Yes.
And they were just in equidistant corners of the, not corners of the circle, they were
There's
just
a-
on sides of the room that were equidistant from each other.
There's in the middle of the room. There's a pulley system activated elevator, and essentially what would have happened was
Let's tell them what did happen first, then we tell them what would have happened.
there's these 4 golems surrounding the pulley system. They are the things that activate to actually make the elevator go up and down. They unfortunately did not figure that out.
We were about to, but then something happened.
Go ahead and tell them.
So, our wizard is a very smart boy, and he decided that he was going to attempt to have a little bit of clairvoyance and assume that these golems are going to attack us if we did anything, so he tried to slice the arm off of one before anything happened. His sword immediately got stuck in the arm, went about, I don't know, a couple inches into it, not cutting it at all in a way that would matter.
I thought it was a nat 20
It was.
on the attack, yeah. But there were a couple of criteria for the golems because they were CR 7.
Yep. So
Yeah.
what does that mean for our party?
That
What
you
would we
wouldn't have been
needed?
able to. You would not have been able to handle one of them.
What would have we have needed to handle all 4?
The wagon.
Yeah, that...
The wagon was actually an explosive trap that the party set off and almost had one character be removed from the campaign.
You want to explain what a, what's it called? TPK is?
A TPK is a total party kill where all of the player characters result in death or unconsciousness, and the campaign isn't over. It's completely ended.
That means game over.
So if
Do
they
not
were,
pass go, do
if
not
they
collect
were
$200.
all, if they had all got caught in the trap, it would have been a TPK.
Mm-hmm. And
So-
I think we all were about to, but one of our people wanted to be a little bit brave. So that really teaches you about when to avoid stuff and when to, like, not.
It's more of just, magical place and
Bunch of stuff we could steal.
statues, elevator, attack.
Yeah.
The golems were programmed magically to only defend themselves. So I thought, all right, I was presented with a situation as the DM. I have my book in front of me. I have a specific situation. I have a specific if this then that situation. If this happened, then that also happened.
But you were banking on the fact that we weren't going to be that dumb.
I am always banking on that fact. So I
It's a
took
horrible
it.
thing to bank
I
on.
took it literally. I said, okay, these golems are only going to be defensive. So a blow for a blow, and a blow it was.
Oh, yeah.
The golem reared its arm back, but because it rolled slow on initiative, it was a slow punch for cocking his arm back. So everybody else ran out.
I didn't, but everybody else did.
Everybody else tried to escape so they wouldn't be assaulted by the golems. The one golem that got hit had swung pretty hard.
It's made of rock.
Clay and
Yeah. Hard material.
So what does the wizard do? Reaction.
Yeah.
He throws up a shield. The golem rolled higher than the shield, smashing through the magical barrier, punching him clean across the jaw.
Yep.
And into the person standing in the doorway. And that's when he realized, oh yeah, this isn't a good idea. Gotta get out of here.
I remember him saying that.
So just
That was-
imitating someone getting punched in the mouth.
Yeah. That was, first of all, hilarious, and second of all, a really good lesson.
He took a lot of damage.
Oh, yeah. Wizards have essentially the armor equivalent of wet paper towels. So
And he
damage
also-
is just like on their person, and they're usually not the buffest of people.
Yeah. So the lesson here is reactions
Mm-hmm.
need criteria to be met before you use them.
And they don't always work. That's another lesson.
That is also correct. They do not always work.
Mhm.
But here's a little tidbit of information for our viewers that you already know. So, on your turn, you can decide not to use your action. You can use your bonus action, movement, whatever. You can hold your action and save it as a reaction. Then you specify, here are the criteria that need to be met before you use an action. Maybe you're waiting for somebody to walk down an alley
Yeah, I
and
was
you
gonna
got
say
like a
that.
trip wire set up. And you say, I'm going to hold my action for if they come really close to the trip wire, I'm going to pull on the wire so they trip over.
Yep.
That is holding an action, which counts as a reaction because you met the criteria. Or maybe, let's say, you're holding an action in combat, somebody runs at you, you'll take a few steps back.
Yep. Disengage.
Yeah.
Well, it's not what disengage is, but
it's
the
a,
word.
you could save your action to do a little bit more movement on your turn. I would allow that because that makes sense. It's just you have to the criteria needs to be specifically met. Let's say you say when so and so is going to happen, something similar happens. I'm going to say you wasted your action that turn. Your reaction is not going to do anything. It can kind of dishearten some people,
But that's part of the game.
Yeah,
Nothing
not-
works 100% of the time
not
in this
everything
game.
works. It sometimes it's trial and error.
Something I've always wanted you to introduce, and I know this is kind of played into hit dice, and if you hit or not, because you rolled a hit. Just like complete misses that you planned, but we still roll for. But it wouldn't make really much sense to just have us miss, because the roll is all dependent on that. I'm kind of thinking about that now.
And sometimes, as a dungeon master, you can fudge your rolls
Yeah,
just to save somebody.
that is an official term, by the way. Fudging.
Fudge your rolls, yes. It's where you roll. This is where the dungeon master screen comes in handy.
Yes,
so
definitely.
much. Is they can't see your rolls, but we, the dungeon masters, can see our rolls.
A
And we're
level of
just
trust, right?
there is a level of trust where for everything, where I'm not gonna say, oh it hits, oh it hits, oh it hits. I'm not trying to hurt the players or make them have a good time. Everybody's playing the game here.
But you're also not trying to kill us day one, right?
Yes. I've had a character die immediately because of an unlucky natural 20 in a very unlucky situation where I put myself in there in an initiative that was a little too high for me. So the creature just got a lucky nat 20 from behind, and I just immediately died because there are certain rules. Essentially, I was in a little too deep for my character.
A little too deep. What was the CR?
2,
What was your level?
1, and there were only 3 of us, and it targeted me.
Yep, that
And
happens.
It wasn't the damage that killed me, but the ability of the attack.
What was
I'll
it?
say. It reduced my hit points maximum by a certain number of damage it dealt. And it dealt all my damage, all my health and damage. So my hit point maximum was reduced to 0.
So what you're saying is, it killed you.
What it did was, it was a specter, and it took its hand. Is gonna get a little gruesome. Just
Be PG here.
visually.
Just do it like Cartoon Network style.
It was a ghost. It reached through my body, and I kind of shriveled up like a fruit drying, like a raisin in the sun.
Okay.
My body and fell on the ground, kind of like a mummy, just dried and dilapidated.
Yeah, that'll happen.
So yes, so that was actions, bonus actions, reactions, movement.
I believe that's called getting your life force drained.
The attack was called Life Drain. So
Yep.
it's a deadly creature, the Spectre with a CR of 2. But yeah, so
One tip I can give is just be very careful fighting undead things.
be very careful fighting things you're not very familiar with.
Well, specifically undead things, because a bear is one thing, but an undead bear is another. It's okay.
Grizzly bear.
Okay.
So the last thing on our list for parts of the turns the free action. This is basically, oh crap, I don't have my weapon out.
Mhm.
Draw your weapon. That's really all it is. Maybe you rustle in your bag a little bit and pull out like a candlestick. I don't know. It's just you do something. It's not very consequential. It's just kind of like putting something away or pulling something out. Maybe waving at someone.
Yeah.
Hi. I don't know.
You're talking about,
Free actions.
yeah, free actions is basically just anything you want to do.
You could pass an item to someone, and then they on their turn would use their free action to it, like accept it. So
If you want to add on flair to your initiative and your turns with just like things that don't affect anything anyway, like if you want to sling an insult after one of your attacks and you want to use it as free action, your DM's probably going to let you.
yeah,
But for bars, that's different because our insults actually hurt because there are spells. So
like
just know
vicious
that.
mockery, but
Yeah, my favorite spell, by the way, because you can insult people and they get hurt.
So yes, the last thing that's important to keep track for combat is something called the surprise round. Sometimes there are situations where an ambush could be set up, and when you roll for initiative, you get all the initiative rolls for everything, and then one group of people has an entire free turn before regular initiative order commences. So you could have the heroes or the champions of the story just start an ambush. Everybody rolls initiative, and then you get ready to do an attack, and you all get your
Mike picked that up when he said that everybody gets ready and rolls an attack.
you all get your own turn before all of the enemies, and it can be a very powerful thing. And there's something in D&D called the action economy. Essentially, the side with more actions wins the combat. And
Statistically, but you can definitely rock that statistic if you want.
oh yeah, so if you have the availability for a surprise round, like lots of rogues or maybe you're invisible, stuff like that, very, very valuable. And try not to miss an opportunity when it comes. And also, you keep your eyes peeled, keep your wits about you, because it could happen to you.
If you don't pay attention to every little thing, because the DM, you could be role-playing with a group of people or a person, and the DM can make a noise, and if you miss it, you have no idea what's going on. And sometimes he'll ask you for your passive perception or your passive wisdom, or your passive, what's the third one?
It's passive intelligence, passive perception, and I believe passive perception is the one that we use the most.
Yeah, but sometimes the DM will just make a noise if it's not like planned, and if you miss it, you have no idea there's a ghost bird on the tree next to you.
An undead bird.
Yeah.
So what else? What else are we missing?
I would talk about pet initiative.
Pet initiative. It's basically
I know we already mentioned like everything has initiative, but you control that.
Some things, like maybe conjured familiars or your own pet, you can just say, hey, they go on my turn, or like if the rules state so, or they have their own initiative that they roll. It's just something that that happens. So there's also, let's see, what else? Legendary actions.
Yes.
We'll circle back to that. So essentially these can be reactions. These are things that happen kind of at the I believe it's a legendary action. I'm sorry, not I believe, but got the information here.
Yep.
Legendary actions are things that certain bosses can perform at the end of another player's turn. This is not a reaction. This is not something else unless it specifically states so. Lots of rules, but they get a certain amount of like points, and they can spend I believe it's up to 3 of these 3 points per round, and then these points reset, and then they can use more legendary actions. They just have a lot more actions, and that's what makes boss creatures with legendary actions so powerful, because we talked about the action economy. The more actions you have, the better. These things, they're smart, they're scary, and they have some tough abilities.
You want to talk about some legendary actions or that you've seen play out?
The iconic D&D monster is the Tarrasque, or the Tarrasque, however you'd like to pronounce it.
Could you briefly describe what a Tarrasque looks like?
It's a giant T-Rex that has an impenetrable hide, swallows civilizations, and is unkillable. Enough said. So.
It's not a dinosaur, though.
Oh, it's much worse.
If you were to imagine like every dinosaur combined but without wings.
It's Godzilla's dad.
Canonically, or just you making that up?
Making it up.
I believe it. It's canon now. Yeah, like, if you were to think... Everybody knows what Godzilla is, but if you were to think of a creature that is, like, the creator of Godzilla, it would be the Tarrasque.
The father of all monsters is the Tarrasque. Like, with a CR of 25?
And what does that mean? Translate to?
No, it's a CR of, like, 20 or 15. It's pretty high.
What does that mean?
You're gonna need some max level characters to kill this thing.
How many?
A lot.
It's so high the number doesn't even matter. That's why I'm asking you.
It really doesn't even matter. You could fight a Tarrasque with some legendary items, and it would just swallow you up, and you dissolve in its stomach.
Now, something interesting, because we're kind of...
Which there are abilities for.
I think I'm about to mention that. Something that I've seen played out when we used to do, like, mock combats with characters in crazy situations. And
good practice, by the way.
Very good practice. Definitely. If you want to get, like, if your friend's a DM or you know a DM, ask them if you could do, like, practice combat or, like, practice situation, because that's how you actually taught me to play when I was first getting started out.
We had our own, like, some private sessions.
Yeah.
And I know with my roommate, we would just do some player versus player, which I don't like. The D&D is not built for player versus player.
It's really fun, though.
It is fun. It makes some people mad.
It's essentially who goes first.
Yeah, whoever goes first kind of wins.
But for a Tarrasque, I believe I might have dreamed this or like did it myself or read it somewhere, but I think what happened was someone got swallowed and then used an anti-magic shield or something, or Tiny Hut, was it?
Tiny Hut is something else.
I think it was like an anti-magic thing, and the Tarrasque just exploded from the inside out.
It was like a discussion of whether or not the Tarrasque was magical.
Yeah, that was it.
That's not.
Which is you'll get into tons of discussions about certain things in D&D. I know we have, and I know we haven't solved some of them yet, such as the floating disc debacle. We'll get to that. We can have an entire episode on that.
You can have your own rulings on certain things.
Yes.
You can rules lawyer it. You can say that we're going exactly by the book, but then there are some situations that you just can't solve. And
where you're both right.
Basically, it all comes down to... I'm not saying that the DM is always right.
But someone needs to be to continue the game.
Yes.
And it's usually the DM.
So, and that's like the role of the DM, is saying if you have a question in combat, or if you have a question about a spell, how something works, and the DM gives a ruling, you just kind of have to say, all right, and you go with it. You can talk to him after the session, so you're not,
If you're successful enough in convincing your DM, you could probably retcon some stuff.
You really could. Really could.
He's laughing because I've been there before. Or I'm laughing because I've been there before.
And I myself have been a player lots of times, so I've had my fair share of questions saying, well, can I use this as my action? Can I use this as my bonus action?
And all these discussions usually stem from initiative.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they're kind of like spell functionality or like, would this work? But it all stems from initiative where could I do this in action, reaction, bonus action, free action?
Ooh, and another interesting thing about spells that we did miss, off the top of my head, there's something called concentration.
Oh, yes.
When you cast certain spells, and they will be listed, marked as this, they require your concentration on it. You can only have one concentration spell up in combat or
at
any time. You can only
unless you're a really powerful wizard who has some kind of weird metagame thing that your DM allowed.
It's basically like you're trying to drive while also
driving another car.
While you're trying to drive while also take the SAT, while also playing a game of chess, while also recording a podcast about playing chess while driving. Yeah. So that's what that's what concentrating on two spells is like. Yeah. So you can concentrate on one thing, kind of like multitask, kind of like if you're cooking on the stove and you got something on the back burner. Yeah. That's what concentration plus casting spells is like. But you can't overextend yourself, which is why the rule was made. So if you're concentrating on a spell and you're hit by an attack, you'll need to make a concentration check to see if you'll pass, and there are rules and tons of difficulty ratings for all of this kind of stuff based on what kind of spell, what kind of abilities you have, and it's all going to be listed down there. But generally, it's a con save of 10, and you would just roll Constitution. Yes. So there's also casting time. Some spells don't have a casting time of one action. Some spells have a casting time of 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 hour.
Sometimes those are, or a lot of times those are concentration spells, are they not?
More often
a good
than
amount of them.
I'd say more often than not, yet, or it's something that's an example. Liam's Tiny Hut is where you spend 1 minute casting a ritual. 1 minute, and
I thought it was 10 minutes.
it's 1 minute from remember mock combat.
I still think it's 10 minutes, but I think, yeah, it could be 1 or 10.
1 or 10. You have to concentrate on the spell, and if if you stop it or you're interrupted from the ritual, the spell just ends. But you get a little hut that's in an impenetrable force field for 8 hours, unless you have an anti-magic zone. There are basically counters to everything in D&D.
Counters to the counters as well.
Counters for the counters, like counterspell.
I was about to say that.
So whether you're going into combat with a sword and shield, whether you are casting some spells, just make sure you're keeping track of when you can use certain abilities.
And when you've used them.
When you've used certain abilities, yes. Some things are on charges or only you can use certain times. It's all listed in your player's handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and the monster abilities are listed in the monster manual. Your DM's going to do their best to keep track of it. Just make sure you're keeping up with your stuff. And please, if you have questions, ask your DM.
Oh, yeah.
They will be more than happy to answer your question, and they'll be ecstatic.
Even during the session.
They'll be ecstatic that you asked a question.
Yeah.
Instead of just trying something and getting frustrated because it didn't work. But, yeah.
The biggest thing I can recommend as a new player is always, whenever you're wondering or doubtful or worried about anything in the game that you're playing currently, ask about it because someone's going to have the right answer. Whether it be your DM or another player who's been in your situation.
Probably ask a DM or the current DM, especially if it pertains to the situation.
Yes.
That way, you're not distracting other players.
Yeah.
And you can get a direct answer.
I know, I've been playing for what, like 2 years at this point?
Yeah.
Or a year and a half? Probably 2 years at this point.
I played 1st edition D&D, and then I skipped a lot, and I jumped right back in when 5th edition came out. But, I've had combat from 1st edition completely different than 5th edition. So I had to relearn a whole new combat situation. I thought I was hot stuff when playing my first game. I had no idea what I was in for.
I've played 5th edition for my entire time playing, and I asked questions at our last session to see if something would work.
You asked questions about abilities you've used for over a year.
Yeah.
Just to double check.
Thanks.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's fair.
If you have trouble remembering stuff, get like spell cards or write them down, or just have the book.
Oh yeah, there are tons of
you don't have to play everything from memory.
Tons of resources you can use, like you make little index cards.
Oh yeah.
Or something.
I'd say at least maybe 3 people out of our 6 or 7 person table always have books out.
Oh yeah, I love my little like my trinkets and everything that I have, or like the spell cards and the magic items, just little helpful.
Also, it may seem dumb, but make props. It'll get you invested in your character.
Oh yeah, 100%.
We're just like adding on extra things with initiative, but part of initiative is like, this is our episode for like, hey, go do it, go roll your own initiative. We're telling you all the stuff that we found interesting about.
Take your own initiative and start playing D&D.
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah.
So I think that brings us to the end of our Roll for Initiative episode.
Right.
You can catch us 2 weeks from today when you're hearing this on the Pirate Media 1 SoundCloud. This has been episode 7 of Discussions and Dragons. Thank you for listening.